Have you ever wondered what people in the Middle Ages grabbed for a late-night snack? When the streets were dark, the kitchens cold, and the only fast food was whatever survived the day? Imagine wandering through that world with just your cravings to guide you. Hey guys, tonight we ease into a world where hunger feels a little different, closer to the bone, closer to the dark, and strangely closer to the kind of comfort you only crave when the rest of the village is asleep. You step into a narrow medieval street, the cool night pressing against your cheeks, the last embers of cooking fires glowing from distant doorways. Somewhere ahead, a faint crackle flickers, and you follow it the way you might follow the smell of a midnight snack in your own kitchen. You probably won't survive this era's hygiene standards, but you will survive the story. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move deeper into the medieval night, guided only by that glow ahead, a makeshift market that flickers to life long after the wealthier households have shut their doors. Most people in this world go to bed early. Candles and oil are expensive, sleep is a form of saving money, and the dark is a place best avoided. But hunger, especially the quiet kind that brews in the stomach after a day of work, doesn't really respect sunsets. So a few hearty souls gather here, under patched awnings and crooked beams, sharing a moment of relief before sleep forces itself upon them. You smell it before you see it. Roasted grain, charred onion skins, the faint sweetness of apples that have gone soft but not yet dangerous. Nothing here counts as a proper meal. That's the point. These are the foods that fill the gap between survival and pleasure. A kind of medieval junk food shaped by chance, scarcity, and a surprising amount of creativity. One vendor drops battered scraps of dough into sizzling fat left over from the day's cooking. The oil is questionable, the dough uneven, but the aroma is warm and inviting. You edge closer, feeling the little pop of hot grease brushing the air. People around you laugh softly. One jokes that the oil has probably lived 3 lifetimes by now. Congratulations, you've just encountered the first joke of the night. A woman next to you holds a small wooden bowl filled with something that looks like crushed grain mixed with honey. She tells you it was made from leftovers, sweepings of barley and millet that would have been fed to animals earlier in the day. But tonight it's a sweet treat. Medieval diets rarely allowed for indulgence, so even modest sweetness felt like a small miracle. And historically, we do know that peasants reinvented scraps like this into quick comforts when they could. Survival demanded it. One mainstream fact right there for your mental pantry. You weave through the crowd, watching people trade bits of food the way you might trade bites of popcorn at a sleepover. A boy chews on a charred turnip, smiling with blackened teeth. Someone else munches dried peas roasted until they pop, almost like ancient proto-snacks. These tiny delights remind you that hunger here isn't just physical. It's emotional. It's the longing for something warm in a cold world, something flavorful in a life defined by repetition. And even though historians still argue whether markets like this existed exactly as we imagine them at night, there's plenty of evidence that informal food stalls served laborers and travelers well past sunset. You pause at a stall that sells what the vendor proudly calls night wanderer cakes. They're dense, heavy discs made from coarse flour, remnants of lard, and whatever herbs didn't spoil during the week. A fringe tidbit for you: some medieval cooks added fish brine or fermented bread water to dough as a flavor boost, making snacks pungent enough to wake the dead, or at least your sinuses. The vendor hands you one fresh from a pan, and you feel the heat warm your fingers. It's salty, earthy, and shockingly comforting. As you nibble, you watch a pair of tired farmers shuffle in. They sit on overturned barrels, sharing a bowl of something thick and steaming. Cabbage cooked so long it's barely recognizable, flavored with a splash of ale. Warmth is more valuable than taste, and tonight warmth is winning. One of them jokes that this is the only meal that ever forgives him for oversleeping. Joke number 2, delivered seamlessly by your imagination. Your eyes drift toward a group of children dancing around a basket of dried apple rings. These aren't the polished snacks you'd find today. They're chewy, mildly sour, and often salvaged from fruit that began to soften before winter storage. The children don't care. They treat them like candy. Their laughter bounces between stone walls, adding something soft to the hard night. You wander again, aware that medieval nights weren't only about hunger. They carried fear of spirits, of thieves, of illness that spread quietly. But the market pulses like a heartbeat. People come here because a bite of food can make the world feel safer, even if just for a moment. You pass a man selling what he claims is pilgrim's energy. It's simply ground nuts pressed together with honey and rolled in crushed herbs. But his pitch is compelling, keeps you awake without letting monsters catch you napping. You smile. If medieval folks had marketing, this guy would run a company. Another vendor hands out warm pottage thickened into clumps. Something between a dumpling and a mistake. You taste it anyway. It's better than it looks. Joke number 3, successfully delivered. As the night market buzzes quietly, you notice how everyone holds their food close, the way people might cradle a cup of cocoa today. These snacks, humble as they are, become little shields against the uncertainty of the dark. They're not about luxury, they're about the small sweetness of being alive. You linger there a bit longer, warmed by the fires, comforted by the murmur of voices, and aware that even centuries ago, humans reached for the same thing you sometimes reach for at midnight. Something easy, something warm, something that whispers you're okay for now. You drift away from the warmth of that first cluster of stalls, letting the soft crunch of gravel under your shoes guide you deeper into the maze of dim lanterns and makeshift awnings. The air thickens with new smells, sharper, smokier, more chaotic. These are the true street snacks of the forgotten. The foods born not from abundance but from necessity, ingenuity, and the sheer refusal to waste anything that might still fill a stomach. You feel the night cool against your sleeves as another fire crackles to life nearby, sending sparks that dance like tiny fireflies before fading into the darkness. A crooked row of vendors lines the next stretch of street, their carts patched together from crate wood and iron scraps. You hear the sizzle of something hitting hot metal, followed by a chorus of amused gasps from a waiting group. A young cook chops onions directly into a battered pan, and they hiss violently in leftover fat from the day's stew. The smell, a mixture of char, sweetness, and something slightly alarming, drifts through the air. People around you recoil and lean closer all at once. It's the medieval version of a guilty pleasure street snack, fried onion scraps, sometimes dipped in coarse barley flour if the cook felt generous. A mainstream historical fact slips in naturally. Street vendors were indeed a lifeline for urban workers, especially in cities where home kitchens were rare or cramped. You take a piece the vendor offers. It tastes like the best and worst onion ring you've ever had, without any ring and definitely without any health code. A man beside you wheezes out a laugh as he chomps down on his own serving, joking that if the flavor doesn't wake him, the smoke surely will. Joke number 1 for this section secured. Farther ahead, you notice a stall surrounded by workers whose clothes are stained with soot, likely blacksmiths or charcoal burners grabbing a late bite before trudging home. This vendor offers a tangled mass laid out on a wooden board, each piece dark, shiny, and slightly curled. It's fried pig skin, but not the crackling crisp version you might know. This is more leathery, chewier, a snack that dares your jaw to prove it's strong enough. You chew a sample, and to your surprise, it's savory and oddly satisfying. The vendor explains that it's made from trimmings no one wanted earlier in the day, boiled, dried, then tossed into a pan for a quick, smoky blast. A fringe tidbit lands quietly. Some medieval cooks even experimented with frying fish bones in this same style, turning the inedible into a challenge snack for the brave. A few steps later, you hear a rapid clattering, tiny objects bouncing against a wide skillet. You approach to see a young girl stirring a mound of roasted grains. Wheat, barley, and rye mixed together, toasted until they pop like soft, sluggish popcorn. She sprinkles a pinch of salt over them, grinning as she tells her customers they help you stay awake on cold nights. Whether that's true or not is questionable, but you appreciate her confidence. You take a handful and let the warm grains crunch between your teeth. It's earthy, simple, comforting in its own quiet way. Historians still argue whether medieval street snacks were this varied or whether we're seeing a romantic blend of sources, but archaeological evidence, broken pottery, burnt grains, and greasy residue, suggests that street foods were a common thread across towns and cities. You feel the ground beneath you soften into memory as you imagine centuries of footsteps worn into these same paths, hungry workers searching for just a little warmth and flavor before sleep. On the next corner, a woman with wind-chapped cheeks stirs something thick in a heavy pot. When she ladles it into bowls, you see its mashed root vegetables, mostly turnips and parsnips, mixed with clumps of old bread. The result looks questionable, but the smell is inviting. She gestures for you to try a bit, insisting it sticks to the ribs. She's right. It's dense, hearty, and surprisingly pleasant once you get past its grayish color. Someone in line mutters that even his mother couldn't make turnips taste this good. The vendor swats him with a wooden spoon, laughing. Joke number 2 glides into place. You move on, brushing past a group of travelers wrapped in wool cloaks, their hands cupped around steaming rolls of dough cooked directly on hot stones. The surface is blistered and uneven, but when you break one open, the inside is warm and soft. It tastes like the medieval cousin of flatbread, baked quickly by pressing dough onto a heated slab. This technique shows up in multiple cultures, a lovely reminder that necessity often invents similar solutions across the world. Another cart offers roasted chickpeas seasoned with a mysterious blend of herbs. The vendor claims they give strength to walk miles through the night, though his recipe seems to change depending on who asks. Sometimes he says rosemary wards off evil spirits. Other times he insists time sharpens dreams. One quirky tidbit: some medieval Europeans believed certain herbs consumed at night could influence dreams, making roasted chickpeas both a snack and a superstition. You pop a few in your mouth. Crunchy, warm, delicious. Across the way, you witness something fascinating. A vendor scrapes the bottom of a pot, not to clean it, but to sell the scraped remnants as a treat. The burnt bits of grain, the caramelized edges of stew, the crispy, darkened leftovers are highly prized by children and adults alike. You taste a pinch and realize why. They carry the concentrated flavor of the entire day's cooking, like medieval umami. A couple of teenagers loiter beside a barrel of steaming broth, dipping small chunks of stale bread into the salty liquid. They chat about the day's work, teasing each other the way teenagers always have, past or present. One claims he can predict the future based on how soggy his bread becomes. You decide not to test his theory but appreciate the joke nonetheless. Joke number 3, delivered with perfect timing. You pause for a moment, looking around at this lively stretch of night. These foods weren't glamorous. They weren't meant to impress anyone. They were quick, cheap, and comforting. They filled long hours and tired stomachs, weaving people together with shared hunger and laughter. You realize that in a world without vending machines or corner shops, these makeshift vendors were the beating heart of nocturnal life. The night deepens. Lanterns sway. People drift in and out, their shadows stretching across the uneven stone paths. You take a final bite of roasted grain, letting the warmth spread through you as you step away from the stalls. In the quiet that follows, you understand something simple and beautiful. Even centuries ago, humans reached for the same small pleasures we do. Tiny bites of something warm in the cold, something flavorful in the monotony, something that makes the dark feel a little less lonely. You follow the dim trail of lanterns toward a quieter corner of the night market, where the smoky scent thickens into something deeper, saltier, heavier, and unmistakably tied to survival. The air here feels older, touched by the long history of salt cellars, smokehouses, and the eternal medieval fear of food spoiling before you had the chance to eat it. You step into this haze, feeling the soft grit of ash beneath your shoes, and realize you're approaching the domain of preserved meats and fish, the unofficial late-night staples of a world without refrigeration. A pair of fishermen, their clothes stiff with dried salt, are hauling small crates toward a stall. Their hands move automatically, practiced from years of repetition. Inside the crates lie piles of tiny fish, anchovies, sprats, maybe even young herring, each one stiff, glistening, and dusted in salt so thick it looks like fresh frost. The vendor scoops them into baskets with a casual flick, offering them to customers as quick snacks. You watch someone bite into one without hesitation, crunching softly through the tiny bones. It's briny, sharp, and shockingly intense. You try one too, and the taste hits you like a medieval energy shot. Consider that mainstream historical fact checked. Preserved fish really did fuel soldiers, sailors, and laborers all across the Middle Ages. Nearby, a man tends to a narrow smoker fashioned from clay bricks and iron scraps. Thin curls of smoke escape from gaps, carrying with them the smell of wood, oak, maybe beech, burning low and slow. He pulls out strips of meat, darkened and glossy, hanging from hooks that sway gently as he works. These aren't meant for feasts. They're for the desperate and the hard-working, the people who couldn't afford fresh cuts and relied on salt and smoke to stretch their rations into the week. You take a slice he offers. It's tough, chewy enough to make you work for it, but it warms your jaw and your stomach at the same time. You walk past a bucket filled with something that looks suspiciously like a medieval dare. Fish packed in fermented brine so pungent it could probably knock out someone who wasn't prepared for it. A fringe tidbit for you: some medieval communities did ferment fish intentionally, producing strong, mushy spreads used to flavor porridges or bread. You lean closer only to immediately lean back. The vendor laughs and assures you it tastes better than it smells. You're not entirely convinced. As you continue forward, a small group of travelers gathers around a fire where someone is skewering chunks of salted pork. The meat spits as the flames lap at it, releasing bursts of sizzling fat that glow in the firelight. One man jokes that this snack is good enough to keep him walking until sunrise, though he admits the saltiness will probably haunt his dreams. Joke number 1 for this section slips neatly into your pocket. A woman approaches with a basket of dried sausages, thick, twisted shapes tied with twine. She slices one open for customers, revealing a firm interior streaked with fat and pepper. Spices were expensive, but pepper made its way into Europe through long-distance trade, and sausages like these were prized for both flavor and longevity. You chew a slice and discover it's dense and deeply savory, with a smoky aftertaste that lingers. Historians still argue whether these late-night markets were common year-round or only during festivals and busy seasons, but there's no debate about the importance of preserved foods in medieval life. Without them, winters would have been harsher, and nightly meals more unpredictable. You imagine families counting each strip of dried fish the way you might count coins, measuring out survival one bite at a time. Further along, you notice something unusual: a small clay stove glowing faintly, tended by an elderly man whose hands move with the steady pace of habit. He's heating small pieces of smoked eel, letting the exterior crisp slightly. Eel was a widespread medieval staple, especially in marshy regions where it swam freely. You take a piece from his outstretched hand. It's rich, slightly oily, and surprisingly satisfying, like nature's version of late-night comfort food. A pair of children hover nearby, giggling as they gnaw on what looks like flat, square sheets. The vendor explains they're eating dried fish leather, thin slices scraped from the flesh of large fish, pressed and dried until they resemble something between jerky and parchment. You try a piece, finding it oddly enjoyable in a chewy, salty way. One child proudly declares he can make a single strip last longer than his sister's patience. Joke number 2 lands cleanly. Past another corner, you stumble upon a barrel filled with salted goat meat, submerged in brine so powerful you can smell it from a distance. The vendor sells small pieces by weight, slicing off chunks for customers who plan to nibble as they walk home. You take a tiny bit. It's incredibly salty, but as it softens in your mouth, it develops a deep, earthy flavor. Salt was expensive, but used carefully, it stretched food across days. Every grain mattered. As you move on, a man waves you over, offering a night traveler's ration, a strip of smoked beef rolled tightly with herbs tucked inside. He claims it keeps people warm and warded against spirits. Whether you believe him or not, the warmth is comforting. One quirky tidbit emerges. Some medieval communities genuinely believed that certain preserved foods could protect against evil, since salt itself was considered a purifying force. You continue chewing as you pass another stall where a woman with broad shoulders lifts a heavy lid from a pot. Steam bursts upward, revealing chunks of salted fish simmering with bits of turnip. She spoons some into a bowl for you. The fish has softened, mellowing into something soothing, like a medieval version of comfort stew. A man beside you mutters that it tastes even better when you're too tired to question what's in it. Joke number 3, neatly achieved. The night feels thicker now, the smoke hanging low, the scents blending into a kind of sensory memory you know will follow you long after the fires die out. Everywhere you look, preserved foods anchor people to the rhythm of survival, proof that in a world of limited harvests and uncertain seasons, the ability to make food last wasn't just clever. It was life. You take one more bite of salted meat, feeling its warmth settle into you. The crackle of fires, the murmur of voices, and the quiet determination of these snack sellers wrap around you as you step deeper into the night, knowing instinctively that the world of medieval cravings is far from finished. You leave the smoky corner of preserved meats behind and drift toward the outskirts of the market, toward the quieter world of peasants, farmers, and families who crafted their own humble comfort foods at home. The cobblestones give way to packed dirt, and the lanterns grow sparser, replaced by the faint glow spilling from small cottages tucked against one another like sleepy animals sharing warmth. The night feels softer here, less chaotic, but no less alive. This is where you discover the true heart of medieval comfort cravings. Foods born from necessity, flavored with whatever the land or luck provided. A narrow footpath leads you past a cottage where the door stands slightly open, the warm light inside flickering like a soft invitation. You step closer, and the scent of toasted grain drifts out, a reminder that even the simplest ingredients can become a kind of bedtime luxury. Inside, a family gathers around a shallow pan set directly over embers. The mother shakes the pan gently, letting grains of barley and spelt roast until they darken and release a nutty aroma. She tosses in a pinch of dried mint, a small flourish in a life that rarely allows for embellishment. You sit beside them as she hands you a small wooden bowl. The grains crackle pleasantly in your mouth, simple, earthy, and incredibly comforting. It's a mainstream historical fact that peasants relied heavily on grains for sustenance, adding tiny enhancements when fortune allowed. One of the children asks if the toasted grains help people dream of warm places. You smile because honestly they might. The father jokes that if you eat enough, you'll dream of being rich. Joke number 1 for this section lands naturally, and the room warms with laughter. You continue walking, guided now by the scent of something sweet burning just slightly, an aroma that hovers between delightful and disastrous. You follow it to a small hut where an elderly woman stirs a pot over a low flame. She glances up and beckons you inside. On the hearth sits a tray of irregular brown pieces, shiny in spots where honey has hardened into glassy patches. It's fried grain cakes, made from leftover porridge mixed with honey and pressed into rough patties before being pan-fried in whatever fat she managed to save. She offers you one. It's chewy at the center, crisp at the edges, and unexpectedly rich. A fringe tidbit emerges as she talks. Some peasants used fermented honey water, the earliest forms of mead, to sweeten these scraps when honey was scarce. Outside, the wind carries the faint scent of apples, and you follow it to a small orchard behind another cottage. Here, a teenage boy crouches by a clay oven, pulling out small, lumpy shapes. They're baked apple dumplings, if you can really call them dumplings, since they're made from coarse dough that barely holds together. The apples inside are soft, collapsing into a fragrant mush that spreads warmth across your tongue. He tells you that these sweets only happen when apples start to turn and need to be saved from spoilage. You take a bite, letting the warmth settle into your chest, and he teases that if his mother knew he was giving these away, he'd be sleeping in the barn. Joke number 2 slips in smoothly. You walk a little farther into the village outskirts, where a group of neighbors gathers around a wide, cast-iron pan resting above glowing coals. The pan holds a mixture of crushed chickpeas, wild herbs, and leftover dough, shaped into rough fritters and fried in shallow fat. They flip them with wooden paddles, laughing as some come out perfectly golden and others decidedly not. When you bite into one, it tastes faintly of garlic and parsley, with a dryness that somehow adds to its charm. Historians still argue whether such fritters were common in all regions or only in pockets influenced by trade and local crops. But the practice of mixing scraps into something fried is nearly universal. Survival tends to inspire similar ideas. Nearby, a group of older women work together around a low table, rolling small balls of millet flour mixed with milk, forming what they call night pearls. They drop them into a pot of simmering water until they puff slightly, then scoop them into shallow bowls. The texture is soft, soothing, something between dumplings and dreams. One woman proudly says they help children sleep better. Another insists the only thing they help is making sure nobody wakes up hungry. You appreciate the honesty. You wander next toward a cottage where a man is roasting something over an open hearth. As you approach, you see its parsnips coated in a thin glaze of honey and vinegar. He explains this is a special treat, only made when there's enough honey left after paying taxes and enough vinegar made from spoiled cider. You take a piece and taste its caramelized sweetness, quickly followed by a tangy bite. It's delicious, and he grins with the kind of pride born from making something simple taste extraordinary. A quirky tidbit slips in. Some medieval villages used roasted root vegetables as makeshift candy, especially for children who rarely tasted sweetness. The night air grows colder, and you pull your cloak a little closer around you. Ahead, another home glows with warm light and laughter. Inside, a family sits cross-legged around a pot of steaming grain mash, oats blended with milk, thickened until it resembles custard, then drizzled with a small amount of molasses. You scoop a spoonful. It's thick, warm, and comforting enough to quiet any lingering hunger. A young boy complains that it tastes better when stolen from the pot before dinner. His sister rolls her eyes and says everything tastes better forbidden. Joke number 3 settles softly into the moment. The more homes you pass, the more you realize how varied these peasant comfort foods can be, rooted in regional crops, seasonal rhythms, and the ever-present need to use every last scrap. But across these cottages, one theme ties everything together: warmth. Not just the physical warmth of fires and food, but the emotional warmth of shared effort, shared scarcity, and shared comfort. You take a final bite of a warm grain cake offered as you head back toward the road. The taste lingers, simple, imperfect, soothing. These humble treats were never meant to impress kings or fill halls with applause. They existed because people, no matter how poor, still craved something small, something warm, something joyful to close out the night. And as you step back into the darkness, leaving the soft glow of these cottages behind, you understand why these modest foods mattered. They were more than snacks. They were small acts of defiance against hardship, little edible reminders that even in the toughest eras, people found ways to treat themselves. You leave the quiet cottages behind and drift back toward the heart of the night, where the air grows warmer, richer, and unmistakably heavier with the sense of luxury. The sky hasn't changed, but the world around you has. The lanterns here burn brighter, the fabric of passing cloaks grows finer, and the murmurs of voices sound slower, more deliberate. You've crossed an invisible border, stepping from the realm of necessity into the realm of indulgence. This is where nobles crafted their own version of junk food, if you can even call it that, treats so extravagant that even their scraps would have felt like treasure to the peasants you just left behind. A stone corridor guides you toward a great manor, its tall windows glowing with golden light. Music hums faintly from within, the soft plucking of lutes drifting on the night breeze. And inside, just beyond the grand doors, lies a world where snacks weren't simply a response to hunger. They were a declaration of wealth, taste, and power. A servant greets you at the entrance, ushering you into a long hall where nobles recline on cushioned benches. Their plates glimmer with delicacies so dramatically different from the peasant foods you tasted earlier that you feel as though you've stepped into another world entirely. The first platter that passes by carries candied almonds, glossy, fragrant, kissed with rosewater. You pop one into your mouth and feel a burst of sweetness unlike anything outside these walls. A mainstream historical fact lands softly. Sugar, rare and expensive in much of medieval Europe, was used primarily by the wealthy, often treated as medicine, luxury, or both. A noble woman beside you laughs gently as she selects a candied almond of her own. Be careful, she says. They disappear before you realize how many you've eaten. Joke number 1 arrives wrapped in silk and sweetness. Across the hall, servants carry trays loaded with miniature pies, golden, delicate pastries filled with spiced fruits, minced meats, or sometimes mixtures that blur the line between savory and sweet. The crusts flake beneath your fingers. Inside one pie, you taste pears stewed with ginger and a hint of saffron. Another pie holds chicken minced so finely it melts in your mouth. These aren't meals. They're gestures, tiny, edible luxuries meant to excite the palate between courses. Historians still argue whether nobles genuinely preferred heavily spiced foods or whether spices simply served as displays of wealth. What is certain is that spices, pepper, cinnamon, clove, ginger, were status symbols, often more expensive than meat itself. Your tongue tingles with their warmth as you sample another tiny pie. Further down the hall, a group gathers near a marble table laden with what looks like shimmering jewels. You step closer and realize they're preserved fruits. Figs, plums, apricots, and pears soaked in honey or wine, then dried until they gleam like glass. A servant offers you one, and when you bite into it, the sweetness blooms slowly, richer than anything you've tasted tonight. A fringe tidbit slips into the moment. Some medieval cooks even added edible gold leaf to these fruit confections, believing gold infused the body with strength and vitality. You're secretly grateful tonight's treats remain largely gold-free. You're not sure your digestion is prepared for precious metals. The nobles drift between tables, indulging in what feels like a series of edible performances. You notice a young lord dipping toasted bread into a bowl of warm, spiced wine thickened with egg yolk. The mixture clings to the bread in silky ribbons, and he laughs when it drips onto his sleeve. Worth every stain, he says, before dunking another piece. Joke number 2 lands with a noble flourish. You wander toward a side table where something more unusual awaits. Delicate fritters shaped like flowers. Their petals curl slightly from the heat of frying, and the entire thing is dusted with sugar so fine it resembles frost. When you bite into one, it's crisp, airy, and faintly floral. The cook explains that these fritters are made using batter infused with rosewater or orange blossom water. Luxuries shipped in from distant lands. You savor the delicate sweetness and marvel at how different this is from the rustic fritters you tasted earlier. Nearby, a long slate board holds cheeses of various textures. Soft, creamy, crumbly, sharp. One cheese in particular catches your attention. Pale gold, veined with green herbs. A noble tells you it's cured in wine, giving it a flavor that feels almost alive on your tongue. Another cheese tastes so strong you're convinced it could fight you, and you're not sure you'd win. Joke number 3 arrives in a bite of bold dairy courage. You pause as a servant carries a platter of roasted nuts glazed with honey and garlic. The combination surprises you, but when you try one, the flavors feel strangely modern, sweet, savory, addictive. You take another handful, and another. You start to understand how nobles could linger here for hours, nibbling idly on foods designed to please rather than fill. A tall, imposing man gestures toward a silver dish containing small, round pastries filled with spiced minced meat. He explains that such treats were popular at feasts but also served after hours, when nobles continued socializing long into the night. One quirky tidbit. Some aristocrats believed eating spiced meat before bed improved dreams, making them more vivid and prophetic. Whether that's true, you can't say, but you imagine their dreams must have tasted incredible. A hush falls over part of the hall as a servant presents something special. Golden wafers embossed with intricate patterns. These thin, crisp treats were often served at the end of meals, flavored with sugar, almond milk, or even tiny amounts of precious cinnamon. You take one, admiring the delicate imprint of vines and stars. As you bite into it, the wafer dissolves into sweetness, leaving a faint echo of spice. The music softens, laughter rises. Everything here feels curated, intentional, elegant. These snacks weren't merely food, they were identity. Symbols of luxury, refinement, global trade, and the ability to indulge at will. And as you step away from the lavish tables and into the quieter night beyond the hall, you understand the contrast more clearly than ever. Peasants crafted comfort from necessity. Nobles crafted comfort from abundance. But in their own way, both groups reached for treats that soothed, delighted, or simply made the night feel a little kinder. You carry the taste of honeyed almonds with you as the manor fades behind you, its golden light shrinking into the distance. Another world awaits further ahead, one shaped by strange cravings, vanishing sweetness, and the rise of sugar itself. You walk away from the noble hall still carrying that lingering sweetness on your tongue, and the night feels different now, almost expectant, as though it knows you're about to step into a world shaped by the earliest forms of sugar, syrups, and confections. The air cools as you move into a quieter lane lit by only a few torches. Their glow flickers against wooden shutters, each one hiding kitchens where rare treats were once crafted with the care of alchemists. Tonight, you slip behind one such shutter and enter a realm where ancient sweet-tooth cravings came to life. You pass under a low archway and find yourself in a courtyard where a handful of cooks huddle around a large copper pot hanging over embers. They stir something thick, golden, and glossy, honey slowly heating into a soft syrup. The smell wraps around you like a warm blanket, and you realize you've stumbled into one of the oldest sweets humans ever knew. Before sugar was common, before candy had shapes or wrappers, honey was the universal treat. A mainstream historical fact stirs naturally into the pot. In many regions of medieval Europe, honey was the primary sweetener well into the late Middle Ages, prized not just for taste but for its supposed healing properties. One cook dips a small wooden spoon into the pot and lets a thin ribbon of syrup fall back with a slow, luxurious drip. Then she drizzles a bit onto a slab of stone where crushed nuts, hazelnuts, almonds, even a few walnuts are waiting. She rolls the mixture into tiny balls, sticky and warm, before offering one to you. It softens instantly on your tongue, rich and comforting. A young helper laughs at the honey sticking to your fingers and says, "It means the bees like you." Joke number 1 for this section buzzes gently into place. Across the courtyard, another cook tends to a tray of candied fruit. Thin slices of quince simmered in honey until translucent. The color glows like captured sunlight, and when you bite into a slice, the chew is tender, slightly tart, and beautifully sweet. She explains that quince, with its stubborn hardness, becomes magical when cooked this way. A fringe tidbit sneaks in. Some medieval households displayed candied fruits during feasts as symbols of prosperity, believing they demonstrated mastery over nature itself, transforming hard, bitter fruit into soft sweetness. You wander past baskets filled with dried herbs and spices, cinnamon sticks, cloves, fragments of ginger. These weren't everyday items. These were luxuries, and their presence tells you this courtyard is part of a merchant household, one with connections stretching across seas. A boy grinds ginger with a stone pestle, coughing dramatically as the aroma fills the air. This one fights back, he grins, before offering you a tiny sliver. It burns and tingles, but in a pleasant way. He says they sometimes mix powdered ginger into honey to create a warming treat for winter nights. Keeps your nose awake, he adds. Joke number 2 finds its spicy footing. You move toward a long wooden table where women are pressing sugar into molds shaped like flowers, stars, and small animals. The sugar isn't snow white like the modern kind. It's coarse, chalky, and slightly beige. This is early cane sugar, expensive and difficult to refine. Each molded piece is a treasure, meant for nobles or wealthy merchants. The women dust the shapes with rosewater, and the scent fills the air with memories of exotic gardens you've never seen. Historians still argue whether these molded sugar shapes were eaten frequently or displayed as decorative centerpieces, but everyone agrees they represented wealth in crystallized form. You pick up a small sugar lamb, marveling at its delicate features. When you taste it, the sweetness hits you slowly, less sharp than modern sugar, gentler somehow, beautiful and fleeting. Nearby, a merchant demonstrates how to make a simple syrup candy by pulling heated honey until it lightens in color and thickens. His hands move with practiced ease, stretching and folding, until the mixture takes on a glossy sheen. He snaps off a piece and hands it to you, It cracks between your teeth before melting into a deep, floral sweetness. He brags that his honey-pulling technique could coax flavor from even the stubbornest hive. Joke number 3 lands with a sticky charm. You wander deeper into the courtyard and find a table lined with clay pots filled with unfamiliar syrups. Date syrup, grape must reduced into thick molasses, and something called sapa, a Roman-era holdover made by boiling wine until it becomes sweet and dense. A woman offers you a spoonful of sapa drizzled over soft cheese. The combination is extraordinary. Tangy, earthy, sweet, and utterly comforting. She explains that long before refined sugar was common, these syrups sweetened everything from bread to porridge to wine. You dip bread into a bowl of date syrup next, tasting notes of caramel and dark fruit. She tells you that in some households, syrup was used not just as food but as medicine, believed to strengthen the lungs and warm the body. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some medieval doctors prescribed sweet syrups for melancholy, insisting that sweetness brought balance to troubled minds. The night deepens as you explore further. A small oven glows in one corner where thin wafers dotted with honey are baked until crisp. Their edges curl slightly, and when you bite into one, it shatters delicately. A young apprentice proudly explains that these wafers are flavored with spice water, rose water or violet water infused with crushed petals. He insists the violet water promotes good dreams, though he admits it might just be an excuse for eating more wafers before bed. At another table, 2 cooks are blending almond milk with crushed rice to form a paste. They shape it into small rolls, dust them with sugar, and let them set. When you taste one, it reminds you of marzipan, though rougher in texture and less intensely sweet. This is the ancestor of marzipan, a treat once beloved in the courts of Europe and the Middle East. The cooks laugh when one of the rolls collapses in the apprentice's hands. Too much almond, not enough patience, one teases. As you savor these ancient sweets, you begin to realize something deeper. These treats were not merely indulgences, they were experiments. Early sugar was expensive, difficult to produce, and often handled like a precious ingredient. Cooks treated it with reverence, exploring its possibilities like early scientists. Their creations were tiny moments of luxury in a world defined by survival. You take one last honey candy from the tray and step back into the night. The air feels cooler now, the sweetness lingering not just in your mouth but in your memory. These ancient confections whisper the earliest beginnings of the modern sweet tooth, proof that humans have always craved a moment of pleasure, even in the harshest eras. And as you move forward, deeper into the winding paths of this medieval night, you can't help but wonder what other cravings await you. Stranger, richer, and perhaps even more daring. You move deeper into the night, leaving the last traces of honey and sugar behind as the air shifts again, this time into something creamier, tangier, and unmistakably alive. The scent leads you toward a cluster of stone barns and cool cellars, places where milk takes on a dozen different forms depending on temperature, time, and luck. Tonight, you're stepping into the strange and wonderful world of medieval dairy. Curds, cheeses, butters, and fermented experiments that range from comforting to slightly questionable, all part of the bedtime cravings of centuries long gone. A soft glow spills from the doorway of a small dairy hut, and you enter to find a woman stirring a pot of warm milk with a wooden spoon almost as tall as she is. The milk foams gently at the edges, releasing a sweet, earthy aroma. She sprinkles something into the pot. Rennet, most likely, and as she stirs, the milk begins to thicken, forming soft curds that look like clouds breaking apart in a white sky. She scoops a small spoonful into a bowl and offers it to you. The texture is warm and custard-like, mildly sweet with a hint of grassiness from the cows that grazed earlier that day. A mainstream historical fact slips in easily. Fresh curds like these were a common snack in medieval households, eaten warm with herbs or honey or sometimes just plain. As you savor the curds, a boy nearby laughs and says fresh cheese is best the moment before it gets too exciting, by which he means too sour, too firm, too alive. Joke number 1 settles in naturally, delivered with the ease of someone who's grown up watching milk transform into meals. You walk further into the hut and find shelves packed with clay bowls of clabber. milk left out to sour naturally until it thickens into a soft, tangy mass. The farmer offers you a taste with a drizzle of honey. It's surprisingly refreshing, like a medieval version of yogurt. He explains proudly that clabber never tastes the same twice. Weather, cows, and time all leave fingerprints on it. A fringe tidbit blooms in the air. Some medieval households believed clabber improved digestion and even sharpened the mind, though others thought it was simply what happened when you forgot your milk in the corner. A narrow staircase leads you down into a cellar where wheels of cheese line the walls like ancient sentinels. The air is cool, earthy, humid, and filled with the sharp tang of aging dairy. Here, cheeses range from fresh and buttery to hard and stony. A guide hands you a slice of something pale and crumbly made from sheep's milk. The flavor is nutty and gentle, dissolving almost instantly. He then slices a darker cheese that smells so strong it practically introduces itself before you eat it. When you taste it, the sharpness hits you first, then richness, then a lingering complexity that settles on your tongue like a story you're not sure you understand. Historians still argue whether medieval people preferred mild cheeses or aggressively aged ones, but records show both varieties filled tables across Europe. Another table holds a bowl of soft cheese mixed with herbs, garlic, and a splash of oil. The woman preparing it spreads some onto a thick slice of rustic bread. The taste is bright and savory, balanced by the cool tang of the cheese. She tells you it's a common evening snack, simple, quick, and perfect for using up dairy that's on the verge of turning. You find yourself nodding. Medieval, use it before it spoils. Cuisine might be the original zero-waste movement. A group of youths gathers around a churn in the corner, taking turns pushing the wooden plunger rhythmically. The churn creaks softly with each push, and finally, when the motion shifts, one girl lifts the lid to reveal freshly formed butter. They scoop curls of it into a bowl, sprinkle a bit of salt on top, and pass it around on pieces of bread. You take a bite and feel the warmth of the butter melt instantly. It's soft, mild, and comforting in a way that feels instinctive. One boy jokes that he prefers butter to marriage because butter never argues back. Joke number 2 glides in smoothly on a buttery grin. Nearby, a small wooden barrel sits half-filled with a tangy-smelling liquid. The farmer taps it and smiles knowingly. It's buttermilk, the byproduct of butter making, slightly sour, light, and surprisingly refreshing. He pours you a small cup, and though your modern instincts hesitate, you take a sip. It's cool, tart, and far more pleasant than you expected. He tells you buttermilk was a popular drink during late-night work sessions or before bed on warm evenings, believed to calm the stomach. In another corner, an older woman lifts the lid from a large crock and proudly shows off something unusual. Sleep curd. It's a mix of leftover whey boiled down with herbs, then cooled until thick. It smells faintly of mint and chamomile. She hands you a spoonful. It's mild, slightly sweet, and feels soothing on your tongue. A quirky tidbit emerges as she explains that some medieval folk believed drinking whey, or eating dishes made with it, could cleanse the body and even improve dreams. Moving deeper into the dairy grounds, you find the most curious sight of the night. A table holding several experimental cheeses wrapped in leaves. One is wrapped in walnut leaves, giving it a bitter, earthy aroma. Another is coated in ash to protect it during aging. You taste a small piece of the ash-coated cheese, half expecting it to hurt your feelings. Instead, it's smoky, rich, and unexpectedly elegant. A passerby jokes that the cheese tastes like a monk's revenge, though no one is entirely sure what that means. Joke number 3 lands beautifully in the musty air. As you explore further, someone offers you a cup filled with something frothy. It's a mixture of goat's milk and herbs, lightly fermented. The taste is sharp and grassy, not entirely familiar but strangely invigorating. The man handing it to you boasts that his goats produce the best milk in the region because he sings to them. You nod politely, unsure whether he's joking or entirely serious. You wander toward the last building of the dairy compound, where a single candle burns over a bowl of curds drained so thoroughly they crumble to the touch. These curds are mixed with honey, cinnamon, and chopped almonds, a rare treat reserved for special nights. You take a small spoonful, and it tastes like medieval cheesecake filling. Rich, tangy, lightly sweet, a harmony of contrasts. As you step outside, the night breeze meets your warm cheeks. The scents of dairy, bright, tangy, earthy, linger around you like soft whispers. You leave the dairy world with a new understanding. Medieval people didn't just consume milk. They transformed it, pushed it, experimented with it, coaxed new flavors from it daily. And every curd, cheese, and fermented concoction served a purpose, nourishing bodies, soothing minds, anchoring nightly rituals. You move forward into the deepening night, ready for whatever flavors await you next, spicier, bolder, and perhaps a touch more daring. You walk away from the cool, earthy comfort of the dairy cellars, and almost immediately the air around you sharpens, becoming warmer, brighter, more electric with possibility. A faint heat prickles your skin, carried on the night breeze along with aromas you recognize and others you've only ever read about. Pepper, cinnamon, saffron, garlic, ginger, and something sharp enough to make your eyes water. You've stepped into the world of medieval spice, an arena where the simplest snack could become a status symbol, where every pinch of seasoning carried stories from deserts, mountains, and oceans far beyond Europe. Tonight, you follow travelers who chase the thrill of flavors bold enough to transform even the humblest midnight bites. A caravan has settled here, just outside the village. Its wagons arranged in a loose circle, lanterns strung between them like drifting stars. Traders from distant regions sit on woven rugs, their spices displayed in clay bowls that glow like gemstone clusters in the firelight. You approach a table where a merchant stirs a pot of something bubbling and red. The air grows warmer around your face. He tells you it's pepper stew, a mixture of leftover vegetables simmered with peppercorns imported from thousands of miles away. Pepper was so prized in medieval Europe that it was literally counted grain by grain, and the stew in front of you feels like a tiny miracle. You take a sip. Heat blooms across your tongue. Not painful but assertive, the way a confident storyteller leans closer to make a point. A man sitting beside you grins and warns, "Careful. Eat too much pepper, and you'll start breathing smoke like a dragon." Joke number 1 rolls easily into the firelit atmosphere. You drift to another stall where a cook, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, sprinkles cinnamon and clove over pieces of fried dough. The dough is coarse, irregular, and probably made from scraps of flour that would otherwise be wasted. But the spices elevate it instantly. You taste one piece. The sweetness is mild, but the warmth of the cinnamon fills your chest, while the clove leaves a faint, numbing tingle. She explains that in some households, these spices were believed to ward off illness by warming the humors, a concept rooted deeply in medieval medicine. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Spices were prized not just for flavor, but for their alleged health benefits, often recommended by physicians. A young traveler approaches with a jar filled with something bright red, saffron steeped in warm water, releasing its golden, almost glowing hue. He dips a piece of bread into the mixture and hands it to you. Saffron tastes earthy, floral, and elusive, and you understand why it was valued more than precious metals. You take another bite as he proudly tells you his mountains are known for producing the best saffron in the region. A fringe tidbit rises naturally. Medieval cooks sometimes used saffron not for flavor but for color alone, turning simple foods into golden luxuries that impressed guests before they even tasted them. Lanterns sway above you as a group gathers around a large stone slab used as a cooking surface. On it, a woman prepares something fascinating. Herb pastes mixed with oil and garlic, spread onto thin sheets of dough, then folded and fried until crisp. She offers you a piece still warm from the pan. The garlic hits first, pungent, bold, and the herbs follow. Thyme, marjoram, maybe sage. One man jokes that garlic keeps away both evil spirits and nosy neighbors. You nod knowingly. Garlic has a way of announcing itself. Joke number 2 settles into the night's humor. You walk farther around the caravan circle and find a man roasting chickpeas in a shallow pan, tossing them with ground coriander and cumin. The air fills with a smoky, earthy scent that reminds you of warmth in distant markets you've never visited. You try a handful. The flavors expand on your tongue. Woodsy, citrusy, slightly bitter. He tells you that travelers rely on these chickpeas to stay alert through long nighttime journeys. Eat enough of them, he says confidently, and you'll never fall asleep standing up again. You hope that's an exaggeration. On a blanket nearby, several merchants trade stories while grinding ginger and pepper into powders. One tells you that ginger was considered a cure for nearly everything: nausea, coldness, melancholy, even romantic troubles. He winks as he says that last part. Another chimes in, saying some medieval texts prescribed ginger mixed with honey as a tonic before long journeys. Historians still argue whether these remedies had genuine medical effects or were simply hopeful traditions people passed down. But no one denies the cultural importance of spices as tools for health, trade, and identity. A group of young women sits around a bowl of spiced wine, warm and fragrant with cinnamon, clove, and a touch of nutmeg. They dip crusts of bread into it, letting the wine soak through before eating it like a soft, dreamy snack. You try a piece, and the sweetness of the wine merges with the earthy warmth of the spices, creating something both soothing and revitalizing. One woman grins and says this is the official drink of secrets, because once you spill enough wine on your lips, the secrets naturally follow. Joke number 3 lands with playful ease. The firelight brightens as a traveling cook performs a small demonstration. She roasts thin slices of meat coated in ginger and garlic, then dusts them with dried mint before serving. The flavors layer themselves with surprising sophistication. Heat from the ginger, boldness from the garlic, coolness from the mint. She explains that combining opposing flavors was intentional, meant to balance the body's humors, to keep warmth from overpowering coolness or vice versa. She hands you a piece of meat from her pan. It's tender, aromatic, perfectly seasoned. You find yourself wanting another bite long before you finish the first. Next to her, a merchant unwraps small cloth bundles filled with something dark and sticky. Tamarind paste. Not a common medieval ingredient in Europe, but not unheard of in trade routes stretching into the Mediterranean. He mixes it with honey and warm water to create a tart, sweet dip. You try it with flatbread and immediately understand why travelers adored it. The tang wakes you up, the sweetness comforts you, the complexity lingers. Farther along, you encounter a bowl of what looks like roasted seeds mixed with salt and a touch of coriander. The cook calls them journey snacks, explaining that they're meant to energize the traveler without weighing them down. You take a handful and notice how the coriander adds brightness, transforming something simple into something compelling. As you walk through the caravan circle, your senses feel fully alive. Heated by pepper, cooled by mint, dazzled by saffron, grounded by garlic and ginger. Spices were expensive, yes, but they were also stories. Pieces of distant worlds carried across deserts and seas by people who believed passionately in the power of flavor. And as you step away from the traders and their glowing bowls of color, the night feels changed. Richer, warmer, more mysterious. You realize that even in the Middle Ages, people weren't just eating to survive. They were eating to feel alive, to explore new sensations, to delight in tastes that traveled farther than most humans ever could. You move on, eager to discover how simple breads and portable foods took on lives of their own under the influence of such bold flavors. You leave the spice caravans behind with your tongue still buzzing faintly, and the night shifts again, this time into something grounding, familiar, almost homey. The air cools, the fires dim, and the scents thin into the warm, flour-dusted world of breads, pastes, and portable foods. These were the medieval equivalents of on-the-go snacks, fuel for workers, travelers, shepherds, messengers, and anyone else who needed something sturdy enough to carry and simple enough to eat with one hand. You step into a stretch of the village where the glow of small bake ovens flickers like quiet hearts thumping through the darkness. A narrow lane guides you toward the first oven. The baker tending it yawns deeply as he pulls out flat rounds of bread. Still steaming, their surfaces blistered and spotted with charcoal marks. He tells you these rounds are called journey cakes, meant to be carried for days without spoiling. You take one, feeling its warmth seep through your fingers. When you bite into it, the texture is firm but comforting, slightly nutty from coarse rye. A mainstream historical fact rises naturally. For much of medieval Europe, bread wasn't just a side. It was the backbone of the diet, often making up more calories than anything else. A woman near you laughs and says journey cakes taste better when you don't know how long they've been sitting at the bottom of your bag. Joke number 1 settles in like a crumb caught in the corner of your smile. Beyond her, another baker rolls dough on a wooden slab dusted with flour so fine it drifts through the air like pale smoke. He folds the dough into small pockets filled with mashed beans, herbs, and scraps of salted meat. These little parcels, he explains, are favorites among night watchmen and shepherds. Easy to hold, hard to spill, and sturdy enough to chew even when work keeps you moving. He presses the edges together with a carved wooden seal, leaving an imprint of a simple flower. When he hands one to you, the filling is warm and savory, hitting your tongue with a satisfying weight. A fringe tidbit enters quietly. Some regions had portable breads designed not just for eating, but also for carrying messages. Symbols pressed into the dough conveyed everything from guild marks to family crests. Imagine a snack doubling as a medieval business card. You wander past another home where a mother shapes wet dough into long strips and lays them across hot stones outside. The strips sizzle lightly, forming something between bread and cracker. Her children fight gently over which pieces are the crispiest. She breaks off one for you and explains that this kind of stone bread was common among poorer families. Quick to bake, simple to store, and perfect for eating with pastes made from whatever ingredients survived the day. You take a bite. It crackles pleasantly, tasting faintly of charcoal and grain. Not far away, a man grinds chickpeas in a mortar, his rhythm steady and calming. He adds garlic, mint, and a splash of oil until the mixture becomes a thick, pale paste. You taste a smear of it on a scrap of bread. The flavor is mild but comforting, creamy, herbaceous, gentle. He claims the paste keeps him awake during long evenings in the fields. Better than falling asleep face first into hay, he jokes. Joke number 2 blends seamlessly into the evening. Historians still argue whether these chickpea pastes were widespread in Northern Europe or mostly limited to areas influenced by Mediterranean trade, but evidence shows they traveled far along merchant and pilgrim routes. Food, like stories, rarely stays put. You continue walking, and soon you stumble upon a group of travelers sitting around a low fire, passing a round loaf back and forth with practiced ease. Each traveler tears off a chunk, dips it into a pot of thick onion paste, and hands the loaf along. When they offer you a piece, the paste surprises you, sweet, rich, and slightly smoky. They explain that onions, when cooked long enough, become almost jam-like. You nod. Medieval snacks have taught you to expect the unexpected. One man holds up his piece of bread triumphantly and says, "This loaf has seen more countries than I have." Joke number 3 arrives wrapped in crumbs and pride. A young girl approaches you with a basket lined with linen. Inside are small bread rolls stuffed with dried fruits, apples, figs, or berries when luck allowed. She insists you take one. The roll is dense, its dough slightly sweetened with honey. When you break it open, the fruit inside glows faintly in the firelight, soft and fragrant. She whispers that her grandmother calls these treasure buns, because you never know what fruit you'll find inside. The name fits perfectly. A little farther on, you come across a curious sight. A man carving bread into shapes, birds, spirals, knots, before baking them into edible charms. He explains that some travelers believed shaped breads brought good luck or warded off bad weather. A quirky note surfaces. Certain regions made bread charms specifically for nighttime journeys, hoping to protect travelers from spirits rumored to wander after dark. You follow the scent of something richer and find a pot bubbling with what looks like porridge, but thicker and darker. A cook stirs it vigorously before scooping out spoonfuls onto a slab where it cools into firm, portable wedges. Grain cakes again, but this version is fortified with ale, dried peas, and bits of leftover meat. The result is hearty enough to keep a laborer going through an entire shift. When you taste a wedge, its dense, savory warmth settles deep in your stomach. Not far away, a young messenger cleans his riding gear while munching on a strip of bread baked so hard it could double as a weapon. He explains it's meant to last weeks, not hours. You soak it in wine when your teeth start to protest, he says. You believe him, the bread feels like it's been to war. As you move along, you encounter another fascinating food, pocket pastes. These are mixtures of mashed vegetables, herbs, and cheese wrapped inside a thin layer of dough, then baked until firm. They fit neatly into a travel cloak pocket, softening slightly as body heat warms the dough. You try one, a blend of leeks, cheese, and a trace of pepper. It's surprisingly satisfying and far more flavorful than its humble appearance suggests. A bard warming his hands near a small brazier tells you that bread was sometimes used to carry flavor between meals. Travelers rubbed garlic, herbs, or even a bit of spiced oil onto dry bread to revive it. A good piece of bread, he says softly, is like a friend. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to stay with you. His words settle into you like warmth from the fire. As you leave the circle of ovens, travelers, and bakers behind, the night seems to hum with new understanding. Bread wasn't just food in the Middle Ages. It was life, stability, portability, and comfort wrapped into one familiar shape. Each roll, cake, pocket, or paste told a story of work, travel, survival, and the simple human pleasure of holding something warm and nourishing in your hands. You step into the next stretch of darkness, knowing the night still has more temptations to reveal. Fried, sizzling, unexpected delights waiting just beyond the next glow of firelight. You follow the trail of warm flour and traveling loaves until a new sound pulls you onward. The sharp, eager hiss of hot oil meeting something freshly dropped into it. The air thickens with the unmistakable scent of sizzling fat, herbs crisping at the edges, and dough transforming into golden shapes. This is the fried heart of the medieval night. Fritters, battered roots, sizzling herbs, and all the spontaneous creations that happened when someone had leftover dough, a little oil, and enough courage to drop something into a pan. You turn a corner and immediately see a circle of people gathered around a fire pit where a cast iron pan sits like a miniature cauldron of temptation. The oil inside glows amber in the firelight, rippling gently as the cook, an older man with sleeves rolled high, drops spoonfuls of batter into it. Each spoonful hits the oil with a satisfying splash, expanding into a lumpy, misshapen fritter that somehow looks perfect in its imperfection. When he pulls one out and hands it to you on a wooden chip, the heat radiates through your fingertips. You bite into it. The exterior crackles. The inside is soft, savory, and flecked with bits of leek and garlic. A mainstream historical fact slips in naturally. Medieval cooks often used leftover batter, sometimes wheat, sometimes barley, to make fritters because frying made even mediocre ingredients taste indulgent. A woman beside you fans herself dramatically and jokes, "If heaven smells like this, I'm going to behave just enough to get in." Joke number 1 lands effortlessly as she takes another fritter. You move on to another stall, where the frying takes on a more delicate form. A young woman carefully dips sprigs of sage into a thin batter before lowering them into hot oil. When the leaves resurface, they're pale gold, shimmering, and crisp like edible lace. She salts them lightly and offers you one. You take a cautious bite. The leaf shatters instantly, releasing an earthy aroma that merges beautifully with the warmth of the oil. She tells you monks sometimes made herb fritters in monasteries as small evening indulgences, especially during feast days. A fringe tidbit emerges. Some records suggest that certain herbs, sage, mint, even parsley, were fried not just for flavor, but also because people believed frying strengthened their medicinal properties. The next fire pit crackles much louder. Here, a group of laborers tosses battered root vegetables into fat like metals into a fountain. Parsnips, carrots, even slivers of turnip disappear beneath the bubbling oil before being scooped out onto a tray dusted with coarse salt. The roots caramelize inside the batter, turning their natural sweetness into something rich and persuasive. You try a piece of parsnip, and the sweetness surprises you. A young man laughs and shouts, "Careful! These are hot enough to melt your tongue off." Joke number 2 arrives with a dramatic flourish. Not far away, an elderly woman tends to a pot of oil with the concentration of a scholar studying ancient texts. She presses small balls of dough between her palms, drops them gently into the oil, and watches them rise and bob like tiny boats on a golden sea. These are sweet fritters, flavored faintly with honey and spiced wine. When she hands you one, its surface glistens. You bite into it carefully, and warm sweetness floods your mouth. She explains that on cold nights, sweets like these helped people fall asleep faster, warming the stomach and spirit alike. Another stand offers something more rugged. Strips of salted fish are coated in barley batter and fried until crisp at the edges. You're surprised to discover how good they taste, salty, crunchy, almost like medieval fish sticks. The cook proudly claims he invented them, though a nearby fisherman mutters that every coastal village has someone inventing the same thing. They argue good-naturedly, and you catch yourself smiling. As you wander further, a group of night guards sits around a pan heated over a shield repurposed as a cooking surface. They're frying small patties made from mashed peas and herbs, shaped roughly by hand. One guard explains that pea patties are the perfect midnight snack. Cheap, filling, and capable of staying warm in a pouch for hours. Historically, peas were essential in the medieval diet, one of the most reliable crops across Europe, making this snack feel both authentic and cleverly practical. One guard winks and adds, "Eat too many of these and you'll stay full for a week, or at least loud enough to make the horses nervous." Joke number 3 rumbles into the night like distant thunder. A cluster of travelers gathers around a frying pot where a man is making something unusual. Spiced dough spirals. He twists ropes of dough, sprinkles them with ginger and cinnamon, then fries them until golden. The spirals emerge looking like small, edible sculptures. When he hands you one, the crispness gives way to warm, fragrant softness. He says they're inspired by pastries he saw in the Mediterranean, proof that recipes traveled along with stories, songs, and gossip. Historians still argue whether fried foods were everyday treats or festival-only indulgences, but frying was undoubtedly a known technique, one that produced snacks people likely ate whenever oil was available. You can practically feel the debate simmering like the oil itself. A few steps later, you encounter an even stranger sight: fried cheese. A merchant places chunks of fresh cheese into a shallow pan of oil until the edges brown and the inside turns molten. He serves it on bread with herbs. When you take a bite, the contrast is heavenly, the crisp exterior yielding to a soft, salty core. He tells you that cheese fries differently depending on the cow's diet, and that his cows only eat the important grass. You choose not to ask what makes grass important. You simply appreciate the flavor. You turn toward the last fire in this part of the night. Here, a traveling cook prepares what might be the ancestor of the modern donut. She shapes slightly sweetened dough into rough circles, pokes holes with her fingers, then drops them into boiling oil. They puff instantly, turning golden with tiny blisters. After cooling slightly, she dips them in warm honey. When she hands you one, the honey drips onto your wrist, and you lick it away instinctively. It's messy, indulgent, and absolutely joyful. As she works, she murmurs that these small indulgences brighten long nights and heavy days. "You don't need a feast to feel rich," she says. "Sometimes one good bite can do it." And she's right. Fried foods have a way of creating comfort that feels immediate and undeniable, warmth you can hold, chew, and melt into. As you step away from the ring of frying pans and sizzling cauldrons, the sounds soften behind you until they fade into the night's gentle hum. You realize these simple foods, humble, improvised, sizzling with life, tapped into something timeless. The human desire to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, even if just for a single delicious moment. Ahead, the world darkens again, pointing you toward the drinks and broths that once counted as meals in their own right. You leave the sizzling fires behind, your clothes still holding faint whispers of fried herbs and hot oil, and as you walk deeper into the medieval night, the world quiets. The crackling fades, the air cools, and gradually, new sounds take over: soft bubbling, wooden ladles stirring thick liquids, the steady glug of something being poured into clay mugs. You've entered a corner of medieval life where drinks weren't merely drinks. They were food, meals in liquid form, midnight comforts, nourishment for tired bodies and wandering souls. In a world where solid food wasn't always available, these concoctions carried people through long hours, cold seasons, and sleepless nights. A small gathering forms around a pot suspended over glowing embers. The liquid inside is pale, cloudy, and thick, almost like a stew that forgot to include solid ingredients. A woman ladles some into a wooden cup and hands it to you. The warmth travels instantly through your hands. When you sip it, you taste barley, milk, and a hint of honey. This pottage thinned to liquid, a sort of drinkable porridge. A mainstream historical fact comes naturally. In the Middle Ages, thick porridges and grain-based broths were often treated as both meals and beverages, especially for workers who needed sustenance without stopping to eat. A man beside you chuckles and says, "Careful. You drink too much of that, and you'll sleep so hard we'll need a shovel to wake you." Joke number 1 arrives with a friendly elbow. A few steps away, a small wooden tavern glows warmly, its open shutters allowing light to spill across the ground like melted gold. You step inside and immediately hear the rhythm of mugs tapping tables. The tavern keeper pours out a thick, frothy ale into a clay jug for a group of travelers. Medieval ale wasn't like modern beer. It was cloudier, yeasty, nourishing. Low-alcohol alesh were consumed throughout the day, even by children, because they were often safer than water. The tavern keeper sees your curious expression and grins. "This," he says, lifting a jug, "is bread you can drink." You sip some, and he's right. The ale tastes earthy, grain-heavy, like liquid bread dough softened by time and fermentation. He explains that many night laborers relied on ale to stave off hunger when meals were scarce. You detect a slight sweetness, hinting at honey or mashed apples used during brewing. Another patron raises his mug and declares that ale makes the night shorter and the stories longer. Joke number 2 bubbles up along with laughter. You wander to a quiet corner where a group of older women sit with small bowls filled with steaming broth. It's thin, pale, fragrant with onions and parsley, and dotted with floating beads of fat. They dip crusts of bread into it, letting them soak before eating. You taste a spoonful and instantly feel calmer. Broths like this were simple. Bones simmered until they released their essence, vegetables added when available, herbs tossed in for warmth. This was comfort, the medieval version of a soothing nighttime drink. A fringe tidbit emerges naturally as one woman explains that some households saved the most gelatin-rich broths for winter nights, believing they strengthened joints and bones. Whether or not it worked, the belief gave the broth a kind of quiet magic. As you leave the table, another scent draws you in, a faint sweetness mixed with something earthy. A young monk ladles out a hot drink from a small pot. He tells you it's a mixture of warmed goat's milk blended with crushed oats and a touch of cinnamon when the monastery could afford it. When you sip it, the drink coats your tongue gently, thick but soothing. He calls it sleep milk and says it's given to novices who struggle to rest after evening prayers, or to brothers who pretend to struggle so they can have more, he adds with a grin. Joke number 3 settles in with warm simplicity. You step outside again, and in the cool air the scent of smoke lingers. Another merchant has set up a small makeshift booth where he sells herbed broth teas, a surprising mix of savory and aromatic. You watch him crush thyme and rosemary between his hands before tossing them into a pot of hot water mixed with a splash of leftover vegetable stock. The result is light, fragrant, and oddly refreshing. He claims it clears the mind and chases away bad dreams. Whether that's true or not, you sip it gratefully and feel its warmth curl through you. Historians still argue whether medieval people regularly drank their meals, or if such drinks were mostly situational, used when food was scarce or work was long. But remnants of pots and writings from the era confirm that soups, broths, and alesh often blurred the line between sustenance and comfort. As you continue walking, a new aroma rises, something dark, roasted, complex. You follow it to a small shelter where a man heats a thick brown liquid in a pot. For a moment, your mind races. Could it be chocolate? But no, cacao hadn't yet made its way to medieval Europe. This is malted barley drink, a proto-coffee of sorts. He explains that the roasted grains create a dark brew with a bitterness that keeps a shepherd awake when the wolves won't let him sleep. You sip it, and the taste surprises you. Roasty, slightly smoky, with a bitterness that settles deep in your chest. He laughs at your reaction and says, "Good. Good. If it doesn't scare your tongue a little, it's not strong enough. A pair of travelers sits nearby with mugs filled with warm spiced wine. The color is deep and ruby, the steam rising in fragrant curls. This isn't a feast beverage. It's a late-night comfort drink made by heating leftover wine with bits of cinnamon, cloves, and orange peel. They let you try some. It tastes like a blanket in liquid form, sweet, tart, fragrant, gently intoxicating. One man swirls his cup and says, "Warm wine makes even bad memories behave." You don't know if that's true, but it feels true in the moment. A young shepherd stops you next, offering a wooden flask. Inside is fermented whey, tart, effervescent, almost yogurt-like but thinner. He tells you it helped shepherds stay hydrated on long nights with their flocks. The taste is interesting, not unpleasant, but definitely different. He shrugs and says, "If you drink enough, you stop noticing." That earns a tired laugh from you. Finally, at the farthest edge of this little gathering, an elderly woman tends a pot of something silky and pale. Hot almond milk. She grinds almonds with water until the liquid turns milky white, then heats it with a spoonful of honey. When she hands you a bowl, the warmth is immediate, comforting, delicate. This dish was popular among nobles and monks alike. Light, nourishing, and gentle before bed. She watches you sip and says softly, "The body rests better when the stomach feels seen." Her words settle into you like steam rising from the bowl. As you step backward into the night, all these drinks, thick, thin, sweet, yeasty, herbal, blend into a picture of medieval comfort that feels deeply human. People have always sought warmth in a cup, nourishment in a sip, reassurance in something they can hold between their palms. Ahead lies a wider world still, snacks from continents stretching far beyond this European night. You step away from the glow of broth pots and warm ale, and the medieval night seems to open around you, wider, deeper, filled with the soft hum of distant winds. The world you've wandered so far has been mostly European, shaped by familiar grains, familiar fires, familiar flavors. But cravings aren't bound by borders, and neither were ancient food traditions. As you walk onward, the scenery shifts subtly, as though the night itself is pulling back a curtain. Lanterns change shape. The air warms, then cools, then warms again. You're moving not just through space, but through continents, into a tapestry of snacks shaped by cultures far older, far broader, and beautifully diverse. A road appears beneath your feet, sun-baked clay, still holding the memory of daylight heat. You follow it into a busy settlement filled with woven mats, clay ovens, and wide stone mortars. Here, North Africa opens its arms. The first scent that greets you is roasted sesame and warm honey. A woman sits beside a flat slab of stone heated by embers beneath. She sprinkles seeds across the surface, then drizzles a thin ribbon of date syrup over them. When she presses them with a wooden paddle, the mixture binds into a glossy sheet. She cracks off a warm piece and offers it to you. The taste is rich, sweet, nutty, deep, comforting. A mainstream historical fact slides gently into place. Sesame and honey confections were enjoyed across the ancient Mediterranean, Middle East, and North Africa, sometimes used as travel snacks, sometimes as offerings, sometimes simply because they were delicious. She smiles as you lick your fingers clean and says, "If you get syrup in your hair, the ants will follow you home." Joke number 1 arrives with effortless charm. Nearby, an elderly man grinds chickpeas with garlic, cumin, and coriander. He shapes the mixture into small balls and fries them in a shallow pan. Proto-falafel, though no one here would call it that. The crunch is crisp, the inside soft and fragrant. He explains they're eaten by travelers before long journeys or by farmers ending their day. A fringe tidbit emerges as he adds that some believed garlic-heavy snacks protected against the evil eye. Whether mystical or simply delicious, the flavor lingers warmly on your tongue. The night shifts again, pulling you eastward into the vast lands of the Middle East, where clay ovens glow and long-handled paddles slide flatbreads deep into their bellies. You stop beside a group of merchants who warm thin sheets of bread over a curved dome. They smear them with pomegranate molasses and sprinkle crushed pistachios on top. When you try a piece, The tangy sweet syrup merges with the nut's earthy richness in a way that makes your eyes widen. One merchant laughs. If you eat enough of that, even your troubles will start tasting sweet. Joke number 2 settles effortlessly. In another corner, a woman prepares a snack from dried figs stuffed with walnuts and dipped lightly in honey. The figs are soft, their seeds crunch lightly, and the nuts add warmth and depth. She tells you figs have been cherished since ancient times, symbols of fertility, prosperity, and, conveniently, excellent snacking. Historians still argue whether ancient street vendors sold these fig and nut treats widely or whether they were mainly made at home, but archaeological findings show dried fruits were common travel rations. They kept well, fueled long treks, and tasted like something between food and memory. The air thickens as you continue, humid now, fragrant with unfamiliar spices and the earthy scent of rice. You've arrived in South Asia, where night markets glow like clusters of fireflies. The first vendor you approach hands you a small leaf-wrapped parcel. Inside is puffed rice mixed with tamarind, jaggery, and roasted peanuts. The mix is crunchy, tangy, sweet, and wonderfully alive on the tongue. A boy nearby fans a charcoal brazier over which chickpea fritters are frying, small, irregular nuggets spiced with turmeric and chili. You take one and instantly feel a warm kick. He grins triumphantly and declares, "That one will wake your dreams before it wakes your stomach." Joke number 3 dances through the firelight. A woman pours you a small clay cup of warm spiced milk flavored with cardamom and saffron. Its sweetness is mellow, its aroma dreamy. She explains that such drinks are often given to children before bed, believed to calm the body and settle the mind. A quirky detail slips into place. Some communities believed cardamom could bring good fortune in dreams. Further along, you encounter a man grinding coconuts and jaggery, unrefined cane sugar, into a paste, then shaping it into small balls. These sweets are soft, fragrant, and deeply comforting. He hands you one and adds that such snacks often accompany celebrations, but also quiet evenings when families gather after the day's heat fades. The night bends again around you, cooler now, breezy, carrying hints of maize, smoke, and roasted cacao. You walk straight into the ancient world of the Americas, Aztec, Maya, Inca, where snacks were bold, practical, and intimately connected to the land. A woman grinds maize on a stone metate, forming dough into small discs and placing them on a clay griddle. These early tortillas puff slightly as they cook. She spreads one with mashed black beans and roasted chili. You take a bite. The flavor is simple, smoky, grounding. She tells you maize was more than food, it was life itself. Nearby, a man roasts squash seeds and tosses them with herbs. They crunch loudly when you bite into them, full of oil and warmth. He laughs and says, "Eat too many, and your jaw will fall asleep before the rest of you." Another joke tucked gently into the moment. But the most surprising treat waits at the center of the market. A bowl filled with thick, frothy liquid the color of dark earth. Cacao. But this isn't sweet chocolate. This is bitter, spiced, ceremonial. He pours you a cup, and the froth clings to your lips. The bitterness shocks you at first, then unfolds into depth and complexity. A mainstream fact anchors itself. The Maya and Aztec peoples drank cacao as a sacred beverage, often flavored with chili, vanilla, or maize, far removed from modern sweets. Historians still debate how often cacao was consumed daily versus ceremonially, but no one disputes its cultural importance. It was wealth, ritual, and sustenance in one. As you shift again, the landscape cools further, turning into Andean heights. Here, women roast potatoes until the skins char and split. They hand you a tiny one, warm, buttery, earthy. These small potatoes were often eaten as travel snacks or quick nighttime bites. Another traveler offers you toasted quinoa mixed with honey, a light, crunchy treat that feels surprisingly modern. And just as quickly as the continental whirlwind began, it begins to soften. The world folds back into the medieval night you started in, but now infused with the flavors, textures, and stories of countless lands. As you breathe in, the truth of all these snacks settles peacefully within you. Across continents, across centuries, Humans reached for the same comforts: warmth, sweetness, crunch, spice, and the joy of a small, perfect bite shared in the quiet of the night. You return from your journey across continents carrying echoes of spices, nuts, fruits, cacao, and grains, and the medieval night settles around you once more, quiet, cool, sprinkled with soft pools of lamplight. Yet something feels different now. You've tasted cravings shaped by distance and ancient trade, but tonight you're walking into a realm where snacks weren't simply food. They were medicines, charms, rituals, and sometimes invitations to shape your dreams. Medieval people saw nighttime not just as a break between days, but as a space where the body, mind, and spirit softened. And food, simple, strange, or soothing, became part of that transition. Ahead, you see a hut with herbs hanging in thick bundles from the rafters: dry sage, sweet marjoram, lavender, chamomile, mint, angelica. The air is perfumed with them, clean and comforting. Inside, an elderly woman stirs a clay pot filled with warm milk and crushed fennel seeds. She offers you a small cup. The drink is mild, sweet, slightly licorice-like, surprisingly soothing. She explains that fennel seeds were believed to settle the stomach and calm restless thoughts. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into the moment. Medieval households often used herbal mixtures as nightly tonics, believing they balanced the body's humors, improved digestion, and encouraged restful sleep. A young boy sitting beside her scoops up a few fennel seeds and whispers, "Careful. If you swallow too many, you'll dream the future." Joke number 1 drifts across the steam. You walk farther inside and notice a table covered in bowls of various medicinal snacks. One bowl contains small honey-dipped almonds rolled in powdered mint. The woman tells you these were sometimes given to children before bed to sweeten their dreams. You try one. It's cool, sweet, and strangely refreshing. She warns you that too many will make you wake up thirsty enough to drink the whole well dry. Beside the almonds sits a pile of wafers stamped with symbols: moons, stars, ivy leaves. These are infused with lavender and rose petals, baked thin and crisp. You taste one, and the floral sweetness spreads gently across your tongue. A fringe tidbit reveals itself. In some regions, people believed eating flowers, especially calming ones, before sleep helped ward off nightmares sent by wandering spirits. You follow the scent of warm spices into another room. A monk balances a pot on a tripod over a soft flame. He stirs wine mixed with cinnamon, ginger, and honey. This sleep wine, he explains, was taken in small amounts as a medicinal nightcap, believed to ease joint pain and calm the mind. You take a sip. The flavor is deep, warm, tender, almost drowsy. He sighs and says, "If the wine doesn't help you sleep, the confession you make after drinking it will." Joke number 2 winks through the candlelight. On a nearby shelf, you spot something curious: chews of candied angelica root. You taste one, and it's sharp, slightly bitter, but strangely invigorating. The healer explains that angelica was believed to protect against illnesses, especially those linked to bad air and melancholy. Medieval people often paired physical health with spiritual protection, and snacks like these carried both purposes. Historians still argue whether medieval medicinal foods worked the way people believe they did, but nobody questions how deeply these rituals were woven into daily life. A bowl of spiced milk wasn't just food. It was reassurance. A wafer stamped with a moon wasn't merely pretty. It was protection. Outside the hut, the night deepens into velvety silence. A group of villagers gathers near a fire pit. Each person holds a small bowl of warm oat mash mixed with honey and chamomile. One woman stirs her bowl slowly, explaining that chamomile was believed to calm the body and invite pleasant dreams. You take a small spoonful. The mash is soft, sweet, comforting. A child hands you a sprig of chamomile and says, "Keep it under your pillow. Scares away bad dreams." Whether the charm works or not, the moment certainly does. You wander to another fire where people crush mint leaves with a bit of sugar, mixing the paste into warm water. The drink is refreshing and gentle. A man claims mint sharpens dream visions, helping you see more clearly in sleep. Whether he means symbolic clarity or simply better nights, you're not sure. He adds with a grin, "But if you take too much, all you'll see is the outhouse at midnight." Joke number 3 finds its perfect timing. You follow another trail of soft lamplight and discover a cottage where a mother prepares something she calls moon bread. She mixes flour with warm milk, honey, and crushed anise seeds, then shapes the dough into small rounds and bakes them on a stone. When you take one, it's slightly sweet, fragrant with licorice and tender inside. She tells you moon bread is eaten before bed on nights children fear nightmares. "Dreams like sweet things," she whispers, "and sweet things make dreams act kindly." On a shelf behind her sits a jar filled with something dark, almost black. She opens it and reveals dried plums soaked in warm wine and spiced with cloves. The aroma rises richly. She gives you one to taste. It bursts softly, warm and tart. She explains that dried fruits soaked in spiced liquids were believed to ease melancholy, making them part of late-night rituals for adults who carried the weight of long days. Elsewhere in the village, you find a small gathering of elderly men sharing a pot of herb-thickened broth. It contains parsley, sage, and something sharper, perhaps valerian, known even then for its calming properties. The broth is warm, slightly bitter, grounding. One man insists it adds years to your life. Another insists it steals them. Historians still argue whether valerian-based remedies were common or reserved for more experienced healers, but evidence suggests medieval people experimented widely with herbs to shape sleep. You pause when you notice a young couple lighting a small clay lamp beside a bowl of sweetened cottage cheese flavored with cinnamon. They feed each other gently, laughing softly. They explain that cinnamon was believed to warm the heart and create peaceful dreams between lovers. The sweetness and spice linger in the air like a quiet promise. Near the final cottage, a healer offers something unexpected. Sleep stones, small balls made from ground oats, honey, poppy seeds, and milk, rolled tightly and dried. You try one. It's soft, slightly nutty, mildly sweet. She explains they were eaten before bed when anxiety or grief made sleep difficult. Poppy seeds were believed to calm the mind, though medieval people weren't fully aware of their chemical properties. You swallow the last bite slowly, letting the warmth settle into your chest. As you walk back into the open night, a breeze brushes your face, cool and tender. The moon hangs above like a silver lantern guiding your steps. Around you, villagers sip, nibble, and share their nighttime rituals. Foods meant to soothe, protect, comfort, and heal. And it strikes you that tonight's journey through medieval snacks reveals something profoundly human. When darkness settles, people everywhere seek the same thing. A moment of peace, wrapped in flavor, whispered through ritual, carried gently into dreams. You walk away from the soft glow of dream-sweetened rituals, and almost immediately the mood of the night changes. The air sharpens, the shadows lengthen, even the distant sounds seem to hesitate before reaching your ears. Because now you're wandering into a darker corner of medieval cravings, the realm of dangerous delicacies, those nighttime bites people ate even when they probably shouldn't have. Foods spoiled, foods toxic, foods risky, foods rumored to tempt fate. But hunger, curiosity, and tradition are powerful forces, and medieval people often gambled with their stomachs in ways that would make your modern health inspector faint. A narrow path guides you toward a crumbling stone outbuilding where a group of villagers clusters around a wooden table. On it sits a clay pot covered with a thick linen cloth. Someone lifts the corner, and an unmistakably sharp odor escapes. Pungent, sour, almost confrontational. This is fermented fish paste, the medieval ancestor of condiments meant to stretch scraps into something flavorful. When a villager offers you a small smear on bread, you hesitate, but try it anyway. The taste is intense, salty, and oddly addictive. A mainstream historical fact settles naturally. Fermented fish condiments, from Roman garum to later medieval versions, were widely used despite their questionable aromas. A young man laughs at your expression and says, "If it smells alive, it must be good for you." Joke number 1 arrives wrapped in bold enthusiasm. You wander farther, following the earthy scent of root vegetables pulled fresh from storage pits. A woman kneels beside several baskets of turnips and parsnips that have begun to sprout and wrinkle. These were winter staples and sometimes, by late season, hazards. She slices one open and shows you the brownish interior. Spoilage. But instead of discarding it, she trims the edges and fries the salvageable parts in a pan of hot fat. You try a piece. It's sweet at first, then bitter in a way that makes you think twice. Spoiled root vegetables could cause illness, but for many, the risk was better than going hungry. A fringe tidbit emerges as she explains that people once believed bitterness indicated the vegetable was working harder, and therefore more nutritious. Whether she believes it or simply needs it to be true, you can't quite tell. You continue until you stumble upon a small group gathered around a stone slab where a man is slicing aged cheese. Not the pleasantly sharp kind you tasted earlier, but something so strong it could chase away spirits. The rind is dark, the center cracked with blue and green veins, the smell dramatic enough to make your eyes water. When he hands you a piece, he warns, "Only chew this if you've made peace with your maker." Half joking, half serious. You try a crumb, and it hits with a force that stops you mid-breath. Rot and fermentation were often separated by the thinnest of lines, and medieval people danced between them constantly. Nearby, someone unwraps slices of blood, pudding left slightly too long, the edges beginning to crust. It's rich, coppery, and risky. Blood spoils fast, even in the cold. But food was precious, and throwing it away too quickly was unthinkable. As you walk deeper into this unsettling corner of the night, you notice a group roasting mushrooms over a small fire. The man tending them insists they're safe. He claims he learned to identify edible ones from his grandfather. But even experts made mistakes. A wrong mushroom could send someone into visions or worse. You try a tiny piece from the edge of his skewer. Smoky, earthy, delicious. He grins and says, "If your dreams get loud, come back and thank me." Joke number 2 floats into the fire's crackle, though you're not entirely reassured. The next stall reveals another risk. Sausages stuffed with nearly anything available. Scraps of organs, fat, questionable cuts, all heavily salted or spiced to mask freshness issues. You bite into one, and the flavor is strong enough to overwhelm your senses. You can't decide if that's good or concerning. Historians still argue whether such sausages were regular fare or survival food, but everyone agrees they walked a fine line between hearty and hazardous. You move on and find a woman preparing nightshade-adjacent berries simmered into a dark syrup. She explains that in tiny amounts, certain berries were believed to soothe coughs or cool the blood, but too much could be toxic. She offers you a single drop on your tongue. It's bitter, sharp, unnerving. You swallow reflexively, hoping she truly measured carefully. Someone beside you murmurs, "If it numbs your lips, don't finish it." Comforting. At another fire, a pot simmers with shellfish carried inland far longer than it should have been. Medieval villages far from coasts often encountered spoiled shellfish traveling by cart. Still, on nights like this, people cooked whatever they had. You try a tiny spoonful. It's briny, soft, and carries a faint sourness at the edges. You quietly hope your stomach is feeling brave tonight. A merchant gestures you over to his cart filled with nuts coated in questionable glazes. Resin-based coatings, herbal mixtures, and occasionally toxic berries were sometimes used for color or flavor. He hands you one coated in something red. You bite it gently. The nut is good, but the coating tastes unfamiliar, slightly metallic, slightly sweet. He shrugs and says, "My aunt swears it keeps her young. I think she's just stubborn." Joke number 3 lands with a crooked smile. As you continue, the night thickens. The risks grow stranger. Someone roasts barely cooked meats, delicacies in households with access to hunting. But undercooked game carried its own dangers. Still, when hunger or desire for flavor drove someone to indulge, caution often took a quiet step back. Another group unwraps fermented doughs that smell sour enough to make you tilt your head back. Sourdough can be delicious, but sourdough that's unintentionally fermented with wild bacteria could go either way. One teen eats a chunk and says proudly, "If I wake up tomorrow, I'll make more." You appreciate his optimism. At the last fire pit, the most curious danger of all awaits. luxury foods carried beyond safe limits, delicate pastries filled with cream, fruit, or eggs brought from noble feasts. Left out too long in the warm night, they become unpredictable. Yet villagers or servants sometimes scavenged these leftovers, treating them like midnight treasures. Someone offers you a pastry filled with curdled cream and spiced fruit. You take a bite. It's delicious, and also slightly wrong, like sweetness wearing a crooked mask. Still, you finish it. After all this wandering, you've learned what medieval people already knew. Sometimes danger is just the price of a good bite. As you step out of this darker world, your stomach warm, your senses alert, the night breathes again. You realize the foods people risk speak just as loudly as the foods they cherished. Hunger can make anything tempting. Curiosity can make anything edible. And comfort, even dangerous comfort, can feel worth chasing. Ahead, the night opens into its final stretch, where these cravings, risks, and rituals reveal something universal about humanity. You leave the smoky circle of dangerous delicacies behind, and the night begins to soften again. The sharp edges of risk fade, the shadows loosen, and a gentler quiet rises around you. The moon hangs low now, round, warm, and steady, casting a silver wash over the sleeping village. You walk slowly, feeling the weight of everything you've tasted tonight. The humble comfort foods of peasants, the indulgent luxuries of nobles, the ancient sweets, the bold spices, the portable breads, the soothing drinks, the medicinal snacks, and the daring bites that flirted with trouble. All of it swirls together as you step into the final arc of this journey. What midnight cravings reveal about humanity across cultures and centuries. A narrow dirt path leads you to a hill overlooking the village. From here, you can see everything in miniature. Fires glowing like tiny constellations, shadows drifting as people finish their nightly rituals, faint laughter rising where neighbors share leftover bread or warm broth. Feels timeless, as though the past and present overlap for a moment. You sit on a flat stone still warm from the day's sun and let the night breathe around you. Below, the cottages quietly exhale smoke from their chimneys. Inside them, people nibble pastries or sip herbal drinks, unaware they're participating in a pattern that existed long before they were born. The truth settles around you like a blanket. Late-night cravings aren't a modern invention. They're ancient, they're human. Hunger after dark is something every culture across every age has known, shaped by the same longing for comfort, warmth, sweetness, salt, or simple fullness. You think back to the children laughing around dried apple rings, the peasants roasting grains in flickering hearthlight, the nobles biting into sugared almonds, the travelers sharing flatbread with spices from distant lands. Each snack, no matter how elaborate or humble, expressed something universal. The desire to soften the hard edges of life, if only for a moment. A farmer approaches carrying a small lantern. He recognizes you from earlier in the night and sits beside you, handing you a piece of coarse bread slathered with herb cheese. He explains that he often eats a bit before bed, just enough to remind my stomach I'm still its friend. Joke number 1 warms the air between you. As you eat beside him, you reflect on how survival shaped so many foods. In ages without refrigeration, preservatives, or consistent abundance, people became alchemists of necessity. Salt, smoke, fermentation, drying, these weren't culinary trends but survival strategies. Yet they also produced flavors people came to love. It's funny how human creativity often blooms alongside scarcity. Below, a group of villagers share mugs of warm, spiced wine and roasted seeds. They lean close as they talk, the firelight painting soft circles on their faces. Watching them, you feel the thread that ties communities together. Sharing food is sharing safety. It's sharing the belief that the night can be gentle, that the dark isn't always something to fear. A friar walks past with a basket of simple honey biscuits. He tells you he bakes them for late-night wanderers who struggle to sleep. Everyone rests better with something sweet, he says. Even saints, especially saints. Joke number 2 shines with quiet mischief. You take one of the biscuits, warm and fragrant, and as it melts on your tongue, you realize medieval people weren't so different from you. They worked hard, worried often, lost sleep, sought comfort, found joy in small things, and turned ingredients, sometimes beautiful, sometimes questionable, into moments of peace. You rise and begin walking again, letting your steps guide you toward the last lingering pockets of activity. A shepherd shares a story about eating toasted barley while keeping watch over his flock. A merchant describes the thrill of tasting candied fruits from faraway lands. A soldier jokes about surviving on hard bread so tough, you could use it to fix a broken shield. Joke number 3 joins the night with a sturdy thump. Historians still argue whether certain foods were eaten nightly or only on special occasions, whether snacks were widely available or mostly situational. But as you walk through these small vignettes of medieval life, the debates seem secondary. What matters is the pattern beneath them. Whenever people had even a crumb of opportunity, they shaped it into comfort. Whether through grain cakes, honey treats, spiced nuts, fried roots, or soothing broths, nighttime nourishment carried stories of family, survival, culture, hope. You pause under an ancient tree at the edge of the village. The branches spread wide like protective hands. From here, the night feels slower, kinder. You inhale deeply, carrying with you aromas of ginger, roasted grain, warm milk, baked fruit, and faintly smoky cheese. They blend together into a kind of sensory map of humanity, proof that flavor doesn't belong to any one era, but to every hungry soul who ever lived. As the last fires dim and the moon drifts behind a cloud, you feel the journey settling into its final notes. You realize that medieval midnight snacks, despite their differences from modern food, reveal something unmistakable. Humans everywhere crave comfort when the world grows quiet. When the day ends, when the light fades, when the mind wanders, we reach for small pleasures. Something warm, something sweet, something familiar or daring, to remind ourselves that we're safe enough to rest. Bread, fritters, broths, herbs, fruits, cheeses, spices. They were never just sustenance. They were small anchors, little rituals, moments of humanity in a world that could be harsh, unpredictable, and hungry. And as you stand there, letting the quiet night settle around you, you feel that same anchor, a sense of connection that reaches across centuries, whispering that even in the darkest ages, people found ways to soften the night. Now, with the journey nearly complete, you exhale deeply, letting the stories rest in your chest like warm bread cooling on a hearth. The village grows still, the world grows soft, and your steps slow as the night prepares to guide you gently towards sleep. The night settles into its calmest hour now, the village quiet beneath a soft blanket of silver light. You walk slowly, each step easing the last traces of tension from your shoulders. The scents of the evening, warm grain, honey, herbs, faint smoke, drift away like memories softening at the edges. Even the air feels gentler, as though the world itself is breathing in time with you. You find a quiet place to sit, the earth cool beneath you, and let your eyes soften. Around you, everything fades into a gentle blur. The distant fires are only warm glimmers now, flickering like sleepy stars scattered close to the ground. The wind moves through the trees in long, unhurried sighs, and somewhere far off, a dog gives one last bark before settling for the night. Your body grows heavier in the most comforting way, as though the weight of the journey is slipping downward, settling you firmly into the present moment. Your breath deepens, your thoughts slow. Every flavor, every story, every warm bite you tasted tonight becomes a drifting ember, glowing softly before dissolving into rest. Allow the stillness to wrap around you like a worn, familiar blanket. Each inhale brings a little more calm. Each exhale sends the day farther away. The medieval world grows dimmer but kinder, fading not in darkness but in warmth, like a candle slowly lowering its flame. And as the last echoes of the night settle into silence, you feel yourself drifting gently towards sleep, carried by the simple truth that comfort, no matter the century, always finds its way to those who seek it.